I mean, there's very clearly a very serious moral crisis. My life was kind of bifurcated between this kind of underground utopia and the violence of the news. It always comes back to the music. And, you know, there's all this talk about community and this and that. But for me, it was always about the music. The power of the music was always in its ability to produce estrangement. And if the music starts to feel like some like chat GPT TikTok thread, then I'm in the machine. I'm not outside of it. And it's not the thing. If it's just a bunch of gimmicks, you're not really saying anything. And I'd like to think that creation is about something you have inside you that you want to say, right? Like, even if it was just temporary, we had moments where we felt free of our gender and free of our sexuality for a minute, like, or free of, you know, expectations about what we were supposed to have done with our lives.
Hey, Emily.
Hi, Chloe.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, how are you doing?
Great. Yeah. First summer day in New York, I would say.
It's very hot.
Yeah.
It's very hot. Well, the reason why I invited you, in addition to being a fan of your writing, just generally, you put out a book not too long ago called Health and Safety. And it is, for anyone who hasn't read the book yet, it's a description of your getting involved in New York's nightlife scene and starting to experiment with drugs. But it also delineates the crumbling of your then romantic relationship, as well as like the fabric of American society at large. And you allude in the book to that the seeds of this project were germinating for a long time. So how and when did you decide to write it? Like, what was this process like?
Yeah, I mean, it began just like everything else, just kind of taking notes. The book is pretty much set from 2016 to 2020, but there's some parts before, maybe a few years before. And it was kind of, I started exploring the psychedelics, as a lot of people did, and started going out maybe around 2015, 2016 in New York, and felt like maybe for the first time since I'd lived in New York, I first moved here in 2003, that I was having a real kind of first order cultural nightlife experience. The city had always felt kind of more conservative before then. And then it felt just like this kind of explosion of all night parties and dance music. And I was taking notes because it seemed special, but I didn't really see how they might be turned into a piece of writing that I could publish, partially because the scene didn't want to be written about or publicized too much. But then the pandemic happened. It gave it a kind of natural denouement. I thought, okay, now I can write a eulogy for a time in the city. And then it ended up being kind of that year 2020 ended up being the end of a lot of things in my life. So it kind of, after that, I was like, wow, I actually have a book.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was curious. I mean, so much of nightlife, or like the scene that you describe and that we're both a part of, is very difficult to describe to people who aren't a part of it. Did you find that to be a challenge at all?
Yeah, I think I was working against an idea. This has probably changed since 2020, but when I started writing, if you told anybody who wasn't part of the scene that you like to go out and listen to electronic music, they either thought you were at Burning Man or at Electric Daisy Carnival.
Yeah.
And it was really hard to convey to people, a lot of people in my life, and maybe at my job, I write for The New Yorker, you know, that I was engaged in something that I found genuinely intellectually fulfilling and artistically challenging and innovative. I think a lot of people, their response would be to not consider it something that could possibly be serious.
Yeah.
And so I worried about that in the writing. because on the one hand, I wanted to write in a way that didn't feel over-explanatory to the people that were part of what I was writing about. But I also wanted a little bit to convince people that were totally outside of it that it was, you know, that it was artistically, creatively kind of important.
Yeah. So a big premise of the book is how drugs helped you reframe the way you saw the world. And there are a couple passages I had in mind. I mean, one of them, you go to an ayahuasca ceremony, like early in the book, and you have this really great tongue-in-cheek description of, you know, the whole ceremony, and like, it's a little performative, but then you actually are affected by the drug, and you say that the drug instructed you to ignore the constant running narrative about how to be a more efficient, cleaner, healthier, more beautiful, undemanding, and more domestically competent woman. How was it that drugs helped you reframe the way you saw the world in like a positive way?
Yeah, I came to psychedelic drugs pretty late. I was in my early 30s when I tried most of the classical psychedelics for the first time. And I came into it at a moment in the early 2010s that I think now we can see was the beginning of this kind of psychotherapeutic approach to psychedelics, or maybe that had been a part of it for a long time, but it was certainly reaching a new, you know, like there were NPR stories about it, and Michael Pollan, his book hadn't come out, but he was like working on it. And, you know, there was the Horizons conference in New York. So I came into it through this kind of like very NPR middle class way approach to drugs that kind of looked down on taking them to party, even if it wasn't explicitly stated. Like, it was much more like I think it was a backlash to the idea of a hippie or a merry prankster or something. It was kind of like, we're serious about this. We're introspective. We're safe. You know, therapy gave it this kind of like veneer of, I don't know, authority or something. And that was my way into it. But I always felt, on the one hand, I mean, like most people, these were pretty life-changing experiences. And then on the other hand, I was always like at an ayahuasca ceremony or I felt, or at Burning Man, actually, like I always felt like I kind of had to participate in a world I didn't quite like align with in order to access the psychedelics. And there was just like a lot of, discourse around them that didn't necessarily feel like me. Mm-hmm. And then I would say about 4 or 5 years into that exploration, I found myself increasingly drawn to parties in Bushwick. And I finally almost felt like I'd found what I'd been looking for the whole time. Yeah.
I mean, it seems like, and you do say this in a way at the end, that this subculture it became like a way for you to find, or it was like an answer to some of the personal and maybe like philosophical crises of meaning that were happening. I mean, for you on a personal level, but then also like on a bigger level.
Yeah, I think, looking back, I think it's important to make a distinction maybe for what it was like in New York versus maybe what it felt like in Europe and other places. You know, New York, when I moved here in 2003, the city was very, Giuliani had shut down a lot of the nightlife. It was a very conservative time. Like, a lot of queer spaces had been kind of like shut down, and because of, even though at that point the AIDS crisis was kind of trailing off, like the fear and the stigma attached to kind of casual sex and all of that really affected the way the city felt. And so, in the 2000s in New York, if you went out to dance, it was like to a Misshapes party or like a motherfucker party. It was these kind of like, they weren't techno. They weren't, they weren't even really, it wasn't even like a nightclub tradition. You'd be at like a party and you'd dance to Prince or whatever. And it was fun, but I think it's crazy to consider now because New York is just, the nightlife scene's just exploded. But in the early 2010s, there were a few parties like the Bunker and Ghetto Gothic, and that kind of held it down. But they were playing in sort of indie rock music spaces. The sound systems often were pretty shabby. So, I think Bossa Nova Civic Club, which opened in 2012, started to change that. And a few other parties, Sustain Release started in 2014, I think, and then it just kind of snowballed. But if you were there in the kind of early days of those moments, like I first went to a Bunker party, I think in 2014, I actually saw Silent Servant. And it was just like, oh, finally, like I'm in an environment that's not brunch and it's also not Webster Hall or Ticketmaster. Yeah. And it's also not, it's not a bunch of straight guys. Yeah. And it, I think for me, a lot of what felt exciting was that, and I was in my 30s, I wasn't like a young person, that young of a person. And it was that, this feeling of, I'd been in this kind of uptight, very nostalgic, literary, social scene, and it just felt liberating to be around something that was less heteronormative, that was less nostalgic, that the music sounded futuristic, the fashion felt kind of futuristic. It felt very like nerdy and welcoming. It wasn't about like being cool. It was about I don't know. It was just kind of a lot of artsy people, and it felt fresh and it felt different, and it involved the drugs that I was interested in too.
No, I feel like you articulated that very well. I was talking to a friend last night about whether or not, because he's been having trouble dating. And we were talking about the challenges of dating outside of this scene once you're a part of it, because it does embody like these values that then it's kind of hard to identify with people who are outside of that. So I understand what you mean.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's like, are we in a cult? But I don't think so. Because but I do think it's like, I do think that certainly with my core group of friends, and my partner who's from the scene, like it, you get to a place on certain dance floors that's like a really deep connection that sustains friendships and makes them closer in this way that is really, it's hard to engineer that. Yeah.
You mentioned in a book, there's a period that you spend in Berlin, and you say that you did live there for like a year in the past to write your previous book, Future Sex. And you describe it as being so much more affordable and freer of some of the things that make life difficult in America. You say reliance on medications, lack of healthcare, debt, spiritual paucity. I mean, I think as an American, I can agree with this. Did you ever consider moving long-term to Europe? Yeah.
So I have like one of my closest friends is Italian, and she's lived in Berlin. I don't know, since probably 2007, 2008, something like that. So I think I first visited her. We met in journalism school. I first visited her in 2009, and then would go back pretty much once or twice a year since then. And, the first time I went, like I write in the book, Bar 25 was still open. It's like, she introduced me just by being there to the Berlin way of partying, right? Yeah, in 2015, when I was finishing my book, I did seriously consider moving there. And I got even like a visa. I wasn't allowed to work there, but I was allowed to stay, and work on my writing and get paid by places in the US. And then I left. And I think it was only at the time really, I think I didn't want to write about Europe. And then when I came back here, obviously there was a lot of back and forth in the 2010s between New York and Berlin, and the music scenes really started to feed off each other. I think at first it was more one way, Berlin into New York, and then maybe started to be a little bit the other way. But certainly like almost everybody I knew would go to Berlin like once or twice a year, once every couple years. And there was this kind of symbiosis there. But I guess for better or worse, even with all its problems, I just always preferred America.
Yeah.
As much as I do love Berlin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are some things, though, I want to, you write about some of like the woke identity politics and in America, but like specifically in Brooklyn. Like I associate this, I can picture exactly like the culture you're talking about. You say, my friends and the young people of Bushwick believed ourselves to be articulating a new moral order. We express this morality through the use of careful linguistic signifiers and acronyms that broadcast to a mutually understanding audience a politics of care and a heightened sense of taboo. Acknowledging one's complicity with power or joining in periodic waves of mass sloganeering online helped us convince one another of our shared goodness. I imagine this might have made some people bristle. And I mean, despite belonging, I don't know if you would say you belong to this community, but I don't know what keeps you part of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because when I was writing that part, I was trying to gauge, and I'm still not sure how much, that peak politically correct moment of maybe the second half of the 2010s, like how much that was just online and how much that actually was kind of part of the spaces that we lived in. I mean, I think, fundamentally, and this is still true, that any like respectable club or bar or party would have the list of like, no sexism, no racism, no transphobia. And I think that almost hopefully is like an unwritten ethics that doesn't need to be spoken about too much. But then within that, there was a lot of sort of posturing and jockeying. But I also think that I think in the tradition of sort of like ironic, psychedelic culture, there was also some making fun of it sometimes. I think right now we're in this weird moment where we're thinking about like whether that was sort of a kind of censorship or sloganeering. And certainly there's been like certainly it's being used against the left right now, obviously. Yeah. But yeah, I wanted to mock it a little bit just because I think what happened in 2020 was, for me at least, the emptiness of some of that.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned in the book the black squares. I mean, I remember that.
Yeah, I mean, I actually wasn't on Instagram in those years. I didn't join Instagram until 2021, and then it was to get on Raya, and I've like never really used it. I follow like 30 people. So
you're really lucky.
But I was very much on Twitter, so I'm not like some, like I don't know, social media. I'm not above it all.
Okay.
But yeah, I guess, I think what really became plain in those years was how empty so much of that posturing was.
Yeah.
And how little it actually protected people in the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I do feel like I still very much see that. I mean, the online virtue signaling thing, that almost just seems to be like, a product of social media. It feels to me like a lot of the book is ultimately about unveiling this like rampant hypocrisy, like within the small world that you live in, but also on a really bigger level. So like in the second half of the book, and I'll ask you about this afterwards, but you start doing these reporting trips for the New Yorker, and you're doing more like political reporting. You're reporting on gun violence and, these like MAGA gatherings. And there's like one passage where you're at a gun rally and you hear gun owners discuss how peaceful the next day rallies will be while also discussing tourniquets. And then you also write, the claim that the pro-firearm movement was not racist was belied by the open presence of racists. I mean, it's just like, but it's absolutely true. And I wonder, since you've also spent some time in Europe and you're like in touch with what's happening outside of the US, do you feel like this kind of hypocrisy is unique to what's happening in America right now? Or is it like a bigger moral crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's very clearly a very serious moral crisis. The decline of consensus values and the rise of right-wing militias, anti-immigrant sentiment, transphobia, homophobia, all of this feels like there's just this racism, it feels, I guess that's what's so stunning about this time is that after all of that, all the corporate Black Lives Matter advertising and it really was an insane time when you go back and look at like the ads. It'll be like Chevron, or something. And it was all a dream. It was all fake. And as we try to navigate the current moment, also trying to wonder how we got here and how all of that discourse failed to bring about any real effective political resistance. There's a lot right now about like how apathetic Americans are maybe, but I think it's because we looked at all that protest, all of that posting, and it didn't work. Which isn't to say that it can't work, but there's a sense right now that there has to be something. How
do you feel like working for the New Yorker, and what is the sentiment? I mean, is it because I've been reading the New Yorker, the Atlantic. I mean, I'm very much in like the same media ecosystem, but it's like how many articles and like investigating and reporting, and I don't know, like, does it, not to be super cynical about it, but like, what is your outlook on like how effective it can be?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is still value. I think I certainly am like really proud to be associated with an institution that really like wants to continue providing substantial information, that, reporters go and witness things directly, and they're not just kind of like riffing on something on their phone. And they're digging for actual information. But yeah, in a world where that information just gets ignored and doesn't really have the power to shift political outcomes, it's certainly disheartening, but I think there's a sense that like somebody has to keep producing a record. The news media in general, insofar as there's a crisis of liberalism, like the news media is essential to the idea of democracy. And and so it's also in a crisis right now, I would say, like an existential crisis. Mm-hmm. It's like a religion you believe in, and like that information and truth has meaning and can sway outcomes. And certainly to participate in the project of The New Yorker, you have to keep believing in it. But certainly there's doubt. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the reporting you did in the second half of the book that I was mentioning earlier?
Yeah. So in 2018, I got hired to the New Yorker at the time was kind of ramping up its web coverage. So I got hired almost as a kind of like breaking news reporter, and which meant that between 2018 and 2020, I just got sent around to a lot of kind of breaking news situations like hurricanes, and I covered the Parkland shooting. I covered the midterm elections in 2018. And then as the pandemic started, I covered, and after the murder of George Floyd, I covered a lot of the street protests in New York and in a few other cities, in Kenosha, in Louisville. And yeah, it meant that my life was kind of bifurcated between this kind of underground utopia and the violence of the news. And I sensed, you know, I don't think it's like I made a bet when I finished the book that Trump was going to win again. I finished the book before Kamala Harris was running, so it did feel like Trump was certainly going to win. And then he did. But I wrote the book wanting to have some kind of record of that first term, because I knew even if I didn't have enough historical perspective to say what it meant, or like, I knew it needed to be kind of written down in the confusion of it, that it was better to have a record of it. So, and the feeling of, I don't know, it really reminded me of books I read about Berlin in the 30s, where people are like in this kind of, you know, like Christopher Isherwood. It's like this a little bit kind of sexually libertine, artistic moment with this looming threat over it. And it seemed a little over dramatic to draw a parallel, but then maybe not. I don't know.
Do you still feel like nightlife and the underground scene is like a utopic alternative to what's happening?
I think it has the potential. And at times it reaches that potential. But like, this is a thing that I think in 2025, it's like kind of all my friends and I talk about right now, or we talk about it a lot. Like, okay, in New York, it stopped. It's no longer, you can't speak of an underground scene. Like, you know, like Basement is not underground. Like Knockdown Center is not. Like these are, you know, these are kind of, you know, like a rave amusement park experience. And I think a lot about what the differences are. And it's like, there's a lot of things like when, you know, 7 or 8 years ago, you'd go to a party, you would know the security, you would know the people at the bar, you would know that like people doing the lights. A lot of them played double roles. They were DJs and they did that. they worked the door and they were performers and it was all one ecosystem. And now, you go to a club, it's just like there's somebody that works there. I don't know. It's like the next night they're working at a Doja Cat concert or something. I don't know why I said that, but like, they're not, they don't give a shit or they're just doing their job, which, and that feels really different. Like, I think a lot about, I think there's still the potential, and certainly there are places where I feel it. I mean, I just got back from Detroit and I definitely felt it. I went to Club Toilet, the party that's thrown by a lot of queer underground collectives, right, in the US. And every year at that party, it's always great and fun. But this year it had a sense of focus and kind of controlled and determined anger and sort of, there was like Kay Gabriel gave like an actual speech on politics, and Arl Zatina did a performance about bathrooms. Like it was very much not just like partying their way through it. Like it felt it, and I felt something that I hadn't felt at a party, I guess, and that was really important and special. So I think it's there, but I think you're not going to find it on like an average weekend night in New York City. Yeah.
It's so inspiring to have those experiences. And I do feel like they're kind of few and far between. And I hate saying that as someone who's like professionally involved in nightlife, but the reason I asked was because towards the end of the book, it's almost, you seem to be a little ambivalent about, you articulate what I think a lot of people have been thinking, which is that, like the music changed after the pandemic, it's trends changed, even like the crowd changed. It's a lot younger. And so it's like, does this still have like the valence that it had like 10 years ago?
I mean, I think often the answer again is no, but then at certain times, like absolutely. And I think it always comes back to the music, and, there's all this talk about community and this and that, but for me, it was always about the music. And I do feel frustrated with, I've gone out in a single night, heard a remix of Whitney Houston, of Tom's Diner, of literally the Hokey Pokey. I heard, like a Fugees remix. I've been at Bossa and somebody just straight up played Kings of Leon, Your Sex is on Fire, or whatever that song is.
I actually like that song, but yes.
It's fine when you're at CVS. Like, do you want to hear it at the club? Like, I guess like the winky ironic moment has to be earned in a DJ set. And I feel like people are losing the thread. And for me, the power of the music was always in its ability to produce estrangement. And if the music starts to feel like some like chat GPT TikTok thread, then I'm in the machine. I'm not outside of it. And it's not the thing. Like, cool, have fun, but it's not the thing for me. That's not what I'm there for intellectually or spiritually. Like have fun with your pop remix. But, and there was a moment where if you said that, you're seen as being like elitist or humorless or something. But I think a lot of people are kind of ready to bring back a little bit of gatekeeping right now, because there's gatekeeping that keeps people out, but then there's like gatekeeping that protects something that's fragile and that matters, and that, like also these nightclubs are spaces for people, that they should be spaces for people who don't make money and who don't have mass appeal. And that means a tolerance for like difficulty and not just like kind of letting everything in. Yeah, that's my little manifesto, but you know, I mean, yeah, like, I don't know. There's a sense among some of my friends. I mean, one of them has said this, that it's like we let a bunch of people in and they trash the place. And, you know, I think it's okay right now to be a little bit like luxury without losing sight of the fact that at the end of the day, it's just a party. We're all here to have fun. Like, but it's okay to say like, do you really want to play that? Like, I don't know. Or really it's like, and I feel this way about literature too. It's like, if it's just a bunch of gimmicks, you're not really saying anything. And I'd like to think that creation is about something you have inside you that you want to say, right? Like, yeah.
So, okay, with all of that being said, who are some of your favorite DJs? Like, what are your favorite parties to go out to?
Well, I don't know that I want to like name all of them. Yeah, there's some really cute afters in New York right now that are, you know, there's some young ones, there's some multi-generational ones. I mean, I've been out of town, unfortunately, for both of the ones that happened, but everybody's gone crazy for the Carrie Nation, and they went on forever parties. Like, everybody says that those kind of like this multi-generational or how would you say it? Like intergenerational reminder of just kind of like New York and what this thing is all about. And, but you know, I've had a really good time. I mean, I had a great time in Detroit this year. I had, I mean, my favorite DJ sets of the year. I saw Batu close Nowadays, a nonstop in February. I think he just put the set up and it was, I don't know. I kind of went, I met a couple friends there, but I was kind of there on my own. I'd been partying all day and like I took a mushroom and had a real moment with that set. It was really beautiful. I got to see Sandwell District. My
favorite.
Yeah, which was awesome. Like,
that was just a few weeks ago, right?
It was a couple months ago. Okay. Yeah, that was like also at Nowadays. But it's felt like you really have to kind of like probably one of the best parties I went to. I knew there was nothing on the internet about it. There was not an RA listing. There wasn't even a post on their social media account. Like, and that's kind of, I think, where we're at in New York right now is it's just, you know, I actually went to Wire Festival and had a really great time. And I think they did a really good job, but that's not going to be the place where I have a spiritual experience. Like it's just, you know, I think now it's like you can go out any night of the week and have a great party in New York right now. But the kind of deeper meaning stuff you kind of, feels
to look for it.
You have to look for it. And like, I mean, not that hard, but like, you know, it's trying to protect itself right now.
Yeah. Okay. I would be remiss not to ask you about this, but we don't have to linger on it. But you do spend a big part of the book talking about a relationship that fell apart. And you write very poignantly about love and the loss of love. There were a lot of passages I underlined. And there's like one phrase you use that he'd colonized your cells. I mean, that's something I have felt before. You also write about the pain of leaving this relationship. And you said part of the pain was about some fantasy of family that had become a delusion months ago. A middle-aged solitude that had always scared me was looming. And I saw the loneliness of the years ahead and it terrified me. How are you feeling now, like in the wake of writing this?
Yeah, I mean, so I wrote this book as I hit 40 and kind of, this has been a preoccupation my entire professional life. Like my first book, Future Sex, was very much, which I started when I was 30. So it was always like, I've always grappled with fantasy of convention and the conventional family, the conventional relationship and children and a home and domesticity. And the way that I think people that achieve that or have that, just have a sense of affirmation. They don't need to really explain their lives to anybody, you know. Now they're probably going to get a tax break or something, you know. I mean, they already do, but, you know, they're really pushing this right now. Yeah. And I've always found that very elusive and yet found it very seductive. And a lot of writing this book was like realizing that my chasing that actually meant that I stayed in a very, very bad relationship, because I wanted that thing so badly. And I see a lot of people in my life like staying in bad relationships because they want to have a baby by a certain time, or they can't rid themselves of this fantasy. And yeah, and I think also just generationally, I mean, it's almost boring and cliche to talk about it, but I do think people who are now hitting their 40s have grappled for a lot of their adult life with the difficulty of like home. Like a lot of people just want a home, but they can't seem to find it, like professionally, romantically, like physically, in an actual house.
Yeah.
And then you're told, or there's like a narrative out there that it's like, 'cause you're fickle and you're selfish and you're, so I've always, really internalized that. It's not something I've been able to brush off. But you know, now that I'm in my 40s and I don't have kids and accepting that I won't, like I almost feel like it's my job to have as pleasurable a life as possible and to, you know, like to feel as if there is a new way of being in the world that one can try to practice and you know, through friendship and through work and all of that, you know, that's if you want to like look at the bright side of things instead of feeling sorry for yourself.
I think that you have a life and career that is very enviable. I mean, for a lot of people.
Yeah, I love my life. I mean, but a lot of this book was grappling with that, with kind of the acceptance that at this point, most of my adult life just never fit into that box. And so then, and for me, the rave scene and the music and and for a lot of people I know, like that really rooted us, and it gave us a sense of confidence that we weren't living like drifting lives with like where nothing builds over time. I know, but at the same time, I don't know. I've had a lot of friends be like, especially in Berlin, I don't know, but in Berlin right now, it feels like there's a lot of fatigue with the drugs and the partying and the way that people's, you know, like I say in the book, people's lives can get kind of shipwrecked there.
Yeah. I mean, that's like a cliche, but for a reason. I think if you move there and you don't have a sense of what it is that you want to do, it can just totally fall apart. And it's something I personally think about a lot because, I mean, like you, I have found a lot of meaning and like fulfillment in this scene, but there is part of it that like breeds this like instability and also like unstable people. Right.
And as you get older, when does this, you know, stop being cute? But one thing I've noticed is that at the parties I really love, there isn't an expiration date, and people go off and do all kinds of things with their lives. They have kids, they have do crazy stuff with their careers. They do all kinds of things, and yet they still come back to the feeling that being in a room with a bunch of people listening to really good music can produce. And I think I find that really like affirming that, there is a nightlife out there that's for 25-year-olds, but I think there's like a kind of longer scale group of DJs and venues and parties that are operating just on a different time scale, and what they're making is not a youth culture thing. Yeah. But it's harder to find.
Yeah. Well, tell me about what you're working on right now, like in terms of your writing at the New Yorker, but maybe any other projects that you have.
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm just doing journalism. I don't have another plan for a book right now. It's such a terrible moment in politics here, and there's a sense, I don't know, it's like a sense of, I don't really know what's going to matter in 5 years. And so it's hard to undertake like a big project. Like I'm kind of waiting for something to well up in me. But yeah, right now I'm just doing some kind of like boring, I'm doing politics stuff. Yeah. And I'm doing one kind of, I've written a lot about dating and sexuality and gender. Yeah. So I'm working on an article about cruising right now. So
nice. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I also see you've been writing a lot about like the ultra rich and
I did this story about like the household staff of the ultra wealthy in Palm Beach, which was kind of like, I don't know. Did you read Remains of the Day ever?
No, I haven't read that one.
Well, the plot of Remains of the Day is this butler who's very good at his job, and his job is working for a fascist, like a Nazi sympathizer in the UK.
Wait, is that a Kazuo Ishiguro?
Yeah, Kazuo Ishiguro novel. Yeah. So, I saw some similarities.
Okay.
Yeah. Or it's just, it's a time of extreme wealth inequality. And so that makes like work really weird. And you can get paid a lot right now being somebody's butler, or being somebody's nanny, but you have to essentially sacrifice your own politics and sense of self. And yeah, it's just I don't know. So that was one way to write about, there's been so much writing about the very wealthy or just like, Succession and White Lotus, all this stuff. It's getting kind of exhausting. But yeah.
Looking back on this period of your life that you write about in health and safety, it was, especially the end, it was a really challenging time. Do you feel like you left those years with a deeper understanding of yourself?
I think so. Sometimes I wonder if I just like fell in. But since I finished the book ends in 2021, something around then, I moved to LA for a few years. I got into wilderness camping. I kind of like did a little test to see if I was into something out of inertia or by choice a little bit. And ultimately I missed New York. I missed sound systems. I missed, I love the mountains, but it's not the same. And yeah, I think the years that I write about changed me profoundly and gave me, and I think others that were part of that world, a kind of, even if it was just temporary, we had moments where we felt free of our gender and free of our sexuality for a minute, like, or free of, expectations about what we were supposed to have done with our lives. And that yeah, those are really, really important. And to have a space outside of your phone. And yeah, it's also important. Like I was saying, in 2025, I did have this moment of wondering whether I was growing out of the scene and it wasn't really for me anymore, whether I was just feeling nostalgic a lot of the times when I went out for like another party, another era, where, I would be seeing the same DJs, but in a room where I knew everybody. And now it's like this like big corporate venue and it feels so different. But then as soon as I'll go in that direction, I'll go to a party that just reminds me, first of just the possibility of artistry and the way that there's a possibility of music that can really break out of all this garbage we're surrounded with, and that really comes from often somebody working alone for a long time for an audience of a few thousand people. And yet they devote all this care, and that inspires me in my writing. It inspires me in the way I move through the world. And I think that's actually a force of resistance, like people that are just doing things because they must and because they know that it might not mean anything to millions of people, but for the few thousand people that they're making the music for, it'll be like a brain breaking level experience. And I just take a lot of comfort in the continued presence of that and persistence of that.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for talking with me. And thank you so much for the great book. I literally couldn't put it down. Then, so yeah.
Well, thanks so much for reading it. And I'm just really happy that we got to talk.
Yeah. Thank you.